Hi, my name is Young Kim. This winter break at Ablprep, I will be teaching both AP US History and AP World History. Today, through this presentation, I'd like to explain what the winter classes will be like, how I teach, the types of materials I provide for my students, and of course, the benefits that students can gain from taking these classes. First, let me go over the exam format. If you understand the format, then you'll understand why I teach the way I do. 40% of the grade is multiple choice, which is based on primary sources, graphs, and pictures. And it oftentimes tests you on basic essential concepts rather than minor details, right? And 60% of the exam is based on writing. So there are short answer questions. There's one document-based question where you look at 7 primary sources. You have to analyze it and then write an essay on those documents. And then you have an essay. You're given 3 topics and you choose one out of 3. So it's 60% of your grade. So writing takes up a very large portion. One thing that people need to remember is that the writing is based on an AP rubric. So even if you're a great writer, but you don't know the AP rubric, you cannot get a high score. So students need to become familiar with the writing portion very early on. I've noticed that when students begin to prepare for the AP exam in the spring, a lot of students still don't know how to write an essay. They don't know the writing format. So there's not enough time to learn the writing and to learn the material. So I suggest that students, take class during the winter, get a head start on the material, learning the material, but also get a very good grasp of writing, how to write these essays based on the AP rubric, so that by the time you begin actually studying for the AP exam during spring break, writing is something that you should be able to do with your eyes closed, right? Without any effort. So you'll be able to have more time and be able to focus on just reviewing the material. So in class, I tend to focus teaching only on key concepts and essential facts necessary for the exam. I don't give unnecessary information. A lot of teachers overload students with a lot of facts. I think they over-prepare them with information. All that is unnecessary. I just tell students what they have to know, and that will help them answer the multiple choice and to write an essay. And of course, I focus a great deal on writing. Writing is something that students need to be very proficient at. Essay questions, short answer questions, they're very predictable, right? Something that we practice in class will come out, and oftentimes they'll be worded differently. So what I do is I try to give lots of sample questions worded in various ways so that students can be very flexible in their thinking, right? That way they can always answer the question no matter what. This is a very brief syllabus of the winter classes. Both World History and US History will be 10 classes long, 3 hours long. Usually the first 2 hours will be lecture and 1 hour will be DBQ, although there's some flexibility there. AP World History actually has less material than AP US History, so we'll have time to cover not just multiple choice and DBQ writing, but we'll also cover short answer questions. This is actually very helpful in really learning the information. It forces students to go through all the material and to be able to write things out. So this will be actually very helpful for students, especially younger students or students who have a harder time learning information. And then US History is a little bit longer, so we won't have time to do short answer questions, but we will have time to do the DBQ. So all this content is from second semester. So all things that students will encounter when they return to school in the spring. Now, briefly, I will go over some of the notes that I give for my students. This one is for US History, and then this one is for World History. It's a little bit different. This is just one type of review guide that I give to my students. AP US History, this is period 3. When we begin, I always go over a brief timeline, and I go over very important dates that you're supposed to know. Although there are a lot of dates in history, you don't need to know all of them, but you do need to know some dates in order to answer multiple choice questions. You have to know certain dates to have a concept of time frame and things like that, right? So I always go over key dates. And then the way these notes are organized is that they're not summary of historical facts. They're organized in an analytical fashion, so it can help you not only answer MCQ questions, but also to write a short answer, long essay, and DBQ. For instance, this section is about the coming of the American Revolution. So here it says, after 1763, after the French and Indian War, Great Britain begins to enforce their laws over the colonies. So this section is about basically what were the impacts of the French and Indian War, or what were the causes of the American Revolution. So while I go over the basic facts, like, we have the Pontiac's Rebellion, Proclamation 1763, I explain why these were a cause of the American Revolution. Not being able to gain land was considered a violation of their natural rights, their right to property. So having some of these basic rights having their basic natural rights being violated was one cause of the American Revolution. Another factor in the American Revolution was that they were taxed without representation because it is a violation of their political rights. They were lacking political representation, which is a basic Englishman's right. And then their legal rights were being violated through things like vice admiralty courts. So all these are causes of the American Revolution. Now, in class, I not only tell them like basic essay topics and what they can answer, but I also provide analysis. On the exam, for a short answer and the long essay and DBQ, they ask you about changes and continuities, causes and effects, and differences and similarities. So what I also say is things like, all of these factors are continuities, right, in the American identity. Right? These are all aspects of colonial sense of rights that have existed, even in England. However, one change in American national identity is the concept of having greater colonial unity. So this is a change, right? So I explain these types of things because they all come out as essay questions or short answer questions, right? And then here I provide not only contextualization, but also examples of colonial unity. So the review guides are organized so that it's very easy for students to answer their exam questions. So it's not just a simple summary. It's all written down in an analyzed form. AP World History is a little bit different. AP World History begins with the year 1200. So there's a very large time frame. Even more so than American history, world history has less facts. And it's even more based on themes and concepts and big picture ideas. So for example, these are two sets of notes. One is called Thematic Review, which provides a brief overview of that time period. So very key themes that one has to know to answer the multiple choice and to do essay questions. And then here, this is what I call must-know review questions. This is a little bit more micro. It asks you a basic question and provides minor details that you're supposed to know for the test, right? So for example, in the period Unit 3 and 4, or the year 1450 to 1750, there are very basic themes or very basic events that happen in this time period. One of them is we see the rise of gunpowder empires. We also see absolutism throughout the globe. So what I do is I provide this theme and then I give examples, right? Provide the theme and give examples, right? Through gunpowder weaponry, the Muslim empires were able to establish empires over certain regions, right? This type of information is very basic, but you'd be surprised. A lot of students, when I ask them to write an essay, they don't remember this very basic information. So what I do is I make sure that everything important is written out, right? And make sure that I test them through writing. I also include things like contextual information that will also come out on the multiple choice, right? So things that are very important to AP, very important from College Board's point of view, are usually written out on these study guides. So this one shows big picture, the big major flow, right, of this time period. And then here, I give a basic question or a prompt and go over basic material. This is all material that I will go over in class through notes, but it's also organized in this sort of question and answer format. So it resembles more of an exam situation. Now, one of the reasons why, oh, not one, I write down all this information for several reasons. One is I like to save time on going over notes so that I can go spend more time focusing on the writing section, right? So I have everything written down. And the other major reason why I have things written down is that everyone takes notes differently. I've noticed that some people don't take notes. Some students write down what they think is important, not what I said. Some students draw pictures. Everyone is a little bit different, right? So I want to make sure that everyone has the necessary information to do well on the test. So all they actually have to do is sit down and memorize. So everything is pretty much laid out for them. And again, the greatest difficulty, I think, in history is not so much understanding the concepts, but memorizing it. And so when you tell students to memorize the information, they kind of look at you like, right, I don't want to do that. Or like, my notes are so messy. They have all kinds of reasons. Or there's so much to memorize, I just can't do it. So in order to avoid such problems, right, again, I have everything organized. This is what I call history drills. Basically, I take all the important information. These are basically College Board questions, College Board multiple choice questions, and the answer. It's basically information that we cover in class, but it's organized so that it's very easy to memorize. It's like a vocab list, right? So what happens is students will sit down and memorize this, and then in class, we'll have a memorization test, right? So this is actually very helpful in learning the information. This is actually quite critical in helping students do well in the multiple choice, right? The more disorganized the student is, the more helpful this will become, right? So I provide these for both the world history and US history. This is stimulus-based MCQ. This is what the multiple choice question will look like on the AP exam. A lot of students make the mistake of reading the passage very carefully in hopes of finding the answer. But this is not an SAT passage. This is a history passage. So basically, you don't even need to read the passage to answer the question. A lot of my students don't even read it. I don't actually usually read it unless I really, really have to. So how do I answer these questions? Well, usually what I do is I read the source. Who wrote it and when was it written? And I do take a look at the content. I mean, I want to make sure that I know what they're talking about, but I don't really pay that much attention to the reading at times, right? So once I know the speaker and the time frame, then I have a pretty good idea about what this document is going to be about. So let's take a look at some of these questions. Number 7, which of the following was an important consequence of the debate over the Jay Treaty? This question is asking you about a consequence over the Jay Treaty. So the answer is not in the passage. So how do you answer this question? Well, you just have to do process of elimination. So you have to have a very good idea about themes and concepts, right? So 1, you have to know what the John Jay Treaty is, which you should definitely know. If you know the John Jay Treaty, it's about impressment, right, and trying to improve relations with England. So we know that in this time period in 1795, right, and the John Jay Treaty does not deal with isolationism, so we cross out A. In this time period, there's no tension between West and South. So B is out. Okay. So it's 1795, so American Constitution has already been ratified and implemented. So there is no need to discuss creating a monarchy using the British model. So the only answer left is D. So that's one way of finding the answer, crossing out all the wrong answers. But then why is D the right answer? Well, in 1795, right, this is the Federalist era where there is a great deal of conflict between the Federalist Party and the Democratic Republican Party. And they fought over, right, whether or not to support the British or the French. So that's why the answer is D. So again, the answer comes from historical knowledge and not from reading the passage. Let's look at number 8. Thomas Jefferson's reaction to the Jay Treaty, as expressed in the letter up here, was most directly a reflection of ongoing debates in the United States over. Again, this question, the answer is not in the passage. They're asking you what was going on in America at the time, right? So at the time of the John Jay Treaty, right, there's a debate between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, right, over foreign policy, and that dealt with the French Revolution. And that's why the answer is C. Again, right, there's no monarchy is out of the question. There's monarchy. Americans have never wanted monarchy from day one, so D is absolutely wrong. Expansion to the West does not happen in this time period. It will happen starting from period 4, from 1800 with Louisiana Purchase, right? It could be about economic policy, but there's not really a debate about economic policy at this time in terms of John Jay Treaty. So that's what the answer is C. So process elimination is actually very important, and knowing really key themes and facts is very important in answering these questions. Having a lot of micro details, a lot of unnecessary facts will not help any student on this exam. In fact, it could only confuse them. And usually in order to make sure that students have a good grasp of their US history, I give a lot of content-based MCQ. These are no longer, these are not on the actual AP exam. These are actually harder for some students than these questions. So I try to give a lot of practice questions that test their knowledge, right, which will give them greater confidence in answering these questions. Now, for the DBQ, what happens is students will be given a topic and then documents. There's a total of 7 documents that they need to read, analyze, and organize. For lack of time, I won't really explain how to do it here. But basically, in class, I will either give mini DBQs or full DBQs, and we'll practice reading and organizing and writing. So a lot of times students have difficulty organizing. They don't know how to organize the documents. And then writing takes a lot of time. So a lot of practice writing. If you practice writing DBQs a lot, by the time you hit May to take your AP, everyone should be able to write the essay within the time limit. So that's why I try to do DBQ every day. DBQ is 25% of your grade. So it's actually very important that you do well. Maximum point that you can get on DBQ is 7 points. And if you want to get a 5, you should get around 5 out of 7. So if you're proficient at DBQs, you should be getting a 5 out of 7. This winter, I will not go over LEQ. In the spring, if you come for spring break, and I usually do a lot of LEQ outlining. And LEQ outlines, the reason I give essay outlines is students have very difficult time writing essays. Some students are very good at it, but a lot of students have a difficult time remembering information. They don't know how to organize it. Everyone has a very different background. So what I like to do is I provide a basic outline for potential topics. This essay question is, what were the causes of the American Revolution? So then I give basic examples and organizations. But then basically, this information can be used to answer any of these questions. What were the impacts of the French and Indian War? Define American identity. Was American revolutionary? These questions, again, can be in the format of the short answer, long essay question, or DBQ. So everything is pretty much organized. Students just have to sit down, read, and pick and choose which information they want to remember and use it on their essays. There's also something called complexity requirement on the DBQ and the LEQ, and I try to provide my complexity statements also. But I do this for both world history and US history. So we do a lot of essay writing, and I provide a lot of outlines so that students just have to sit down and learn and come to class just to practice. And there's something called contextualization statements. You have to write them for both the DBQ and the LEQ for both world and US history. They're not actually very hard to write, but again, everyone has a very different background. So what I do is I like to provide basic contextualization statements that students can use in their essays. At school, teachers have all different types of standards. Some teachers only want you to do well enough to, get 1 point to get credit on the AP. Some teachers want you to write a very good essay. So they all have different requirements. Some people want very long contextualizations, like 5 sentences. Some people want like examples. But on the real AP, you just need to write about 2 sentences, about 2 to 3 sentences, no more than 3, and it's supposed to be quite general. You're not supposed to provide a lot of specific examples. So what I try to do is I try to teach based on the College Board rubric, and everything's organized again, so students can just sit and learn and remember and then be able to utilize it in their essays. This is the end of the presentation. 되게 긴 영상 들어주셔서 너무 감사하고, 제가 사실은 하고 싶었던 말들은 되게 많은데, 오늘은 그냥, 제가 생각할 때, 굉장히 키포인트만 이제 말씀드렸고, 혹시 더 어떤, 질문 있으시거나, 궁금한 부분 있으시면, 학원에 전화 주시면, 아마 연결이 돼서 이제 뭐 통화가 가능하지 않을까 싶습니다. 아무튼 잘 봐주셔서 감사하고 겨울방학 때 꼭 뵙기를 바랍니다. 감사합니다.